This is TWiT.
I don't know what, this is an example of government kind of making a mistake. You're both Commonwealth types. Cory, born and raised in Canada. Canada passed a law a couple of weeks ago, C-18, that required companies like Google and Facebook to pay for links to news media. The response from Meta was immediate. They said, well, fine, you don't need news. It's only 3% of our users read news on Meta platforms like Instagram and Facebook. So see ya, Canada. Now the Canadian government is pissed off. They call this ban reckless because of wildfires in the West. Horrific, we know. But some people fleeing wildfires in Yellowknife, for instance, have complained there that the ban prevented them from sharing important data about the fires, I guess links to the local newscast. And of course, for some reason, I don't know why, the Heritage Minister of Canada, Pascale Saint-Onge, is responsible for all of this. She posted Meta's reckless choice. I should do it in a bad French accent, but I won't. Meta's reckless choice to block news is hurting access to vital information on Facebook and Instagram. We're calling on them to reinstate news sharing today for the safety of Canadians facing this emergency. We need more news right now, not less. Who's at fault here?
So I think Rebecca and I might have a small disagreement about this. I'm not sure. It's been a while since we talked about news bargaining codes together. But
Australia has done this. We should point out. Rupert Murdoch and others said, this is not right, mate. So they passed a law.
Excellent Australian accent.
It's terrible. It's the worst. I know. I'm sorry. And it's worse than my French accent. And then
good Logan Paul.
Really? That bad? And then they've toned it down. They've negotiated. It's been settled in Australia, although I understand Google is negotiating and making some payments to news publishers down there. Canada watching this and paying no attention to Spain and France
and Germany,
said, we should do the same thing.
So I think that the mistake that they made, the big one, was not failing to pay attention to what happened in Spain and Germany and so on. It was the category error that the problem with what tech is doing to the news is that it steals its content by allowing people to link to and discuss the news or to index the news so people can find it. And I think there's no reasonable world in which that is bad for the news. Or where it's something that you should need permission for. I think if you're not allowed to talk about the news, it's not the news, it's a secret. But what they ignored is what tech actually does steal from news companies, which is money, which is a lot less ambiguous, right? And the way they steal money is by having an ad tech monopoly. So like the two big ad brokers, which are Meta and Google, they are the seller's agent, the buyer's agent. Yeah. They own the market. They are also sellers and buyers in that market. So this is like if you were getting a divorce and you and your wife had the same lawyer who was also the judge and trying to match with both of you on Tinder. They came out with 51% of your marriage estate, which is what the share that the two ad tech companies get, 51% of the ad dollars. If you're a subscriber supported news entity, then two tech companies, Apple and Google, take 30 cents of every subscriber dollar that you get through your apps. There's just, sort of rampant ad fraud. There's price fixing in the market, programs like Jedi Blue, where Facebook and Google illegally colluded to rig the market. So ads cost more, the publishers got less and they got more. And all of these things are actually pretty easy to understand. And if we solved like any of them, right? Like, so imagine that we fix the app tax, which is currently 30% for processing every payment made in an app. So the finance monopoly, which horribly gouges on payment processing, charges about 3%. And that's like way too high. And it went up 40% during the pandemic. The tech companies charge 30%. So they're charging 300% of the extremely inflated rate. So imagine if every publisher that collected subscriber fees through an app could just get 25% more out of their subscribers, right? It'd be like growing your subscriber base by a quarter overnight. That would be massive for them. And it's the kind of thing that governments could step in and do that would put a lot more money in the pockets of every news entity, not just the ones best situated to bargain with the tech companies. And it would mean that the way that they made money was by making more news, not by profit sharing with the tech companies, which are the companies that we really want them to be watchdogging. And so, Torstar, which is the biggest news publisher in Canada, had a long-running, really good investigative series called Defanging Big Tech that ended as soon as Google agreed to start profit sharing with them. Maybe it was a coincidence, but I think that it wasn't, right? And so I think that, and I wrote a thing about this called Saving the News from Big Tech for EFF that has 4 recommendations. And I think that this was, as you say, a foreseeable outcome, that we would go from you must bargain to you must publish. Because as soon as you say to the tech platforms, you must bargain for the news that's on your platform, they're like, fine, no news. And then they're like, oh no, you have to carry the news. And there's strong speech interests in publishers not being told that they have to carry certain news. There's a lot of extremely objectionable news in Canada. Canada is the birthplace of many of the far-right conspiratorial movements that we think of as being American. It's where, Proud Boys was founded by a Canadian and so on. And we have some of the most egregious, xenophobic, awful, and extremely popular news entities. And if we're going to say to tech platforms, you must carry the news, even if you find it objectionable, that is going to be effectively a way to force tech platforms to carry disinformation, xenophobia, conspiratorialism, racial hatred, and so on. So I just think that it was I'm all for making the tech platforms stop ripping off the news companies. I just think we should focus on the thing they steal, which is money and not news.
And Rebecca can't disagree with that, surely.
No, I don't disagree with that, but I do have a few things to say about the news media bargaining code and how successful that is. When in choke point capitalism, Cory and I talk about the things that don't work to widen these choke points out and the things that do work. And one of the things that we know that does work is to directly regulate buyer power. So we don't have anything against that per se. But there are we can learn a lot from how it's been done in Australia. So for one thing, yes, it has injected a bunch of money into the news ecosystem, but there's no transparency requirement. And so we don't know where that money's gone, but we have a pretty good sense that it goes mostly to the Murdoch press, or a lot to the Murdoch press, which is the big media in Australia. And there's also no requirement that it actually be spent on more journalism, more journalists actually creating high quality content rather than into investor pockets. And so that's another really big problem with this kind of intervention. We've got to think, I think, much more clearly about what it is that we want to encourage. And if it is just money being shifted from some shareholders to other shareholders, then okay, but don't pretend that it's about supporting journalism if that in that case. And also really, really important that we don't cement these choke points in. Most of the money that has been injected into Australia via the news media bargaining code has come from Google. And that relies on Google staying big enough and powerful enough and profitable enough to keep putting this money in there. And I think that Cory and I both agree that that's really dangerous as well. So yes, if we want to get quality journalism, and we want journalists to be able to be paid, and we want to have again an ecosystem where everybody can be paid fairly for their work. This is not necessarily the best way of doing it.
And I think it's fair to say that Google and Facebook drive traffic as well, and there is some benefit to being linked on a Facebook page or to show up in a Google search that has some value. I have to say though, I'm a podcaster. Podcasting is absolutely dying because Google and Facebook have eaten up all the ad dollars, and advertisers understandably say we only want to buy ads where we can know everything possible about the person who's seeing those ads. And that's the kind of thing that Facebook and Google offer. So there's a whole privacy component there as well, and something podcasting cannot do unless you listen in an app like, let's say, Spotify or iHeart. Mm-hmm. So it's hurting podcasting. I don't know if that's journalism, but it's definitely hurting podcasting. And by the way, I'm not asking for any money from Facebook or Google. That's not what I want. I want a market where we can compete fairly. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's really important that advertisers, I think that we educate advertisers as well, though, that they are also getting screwed by Google and Facebook.
Absolutely.
And that context-based ads, we know, like we've started seeing some really interesting natural experiments once the GDPR came in Europe. And stopped them from surveilling their users quite so intensely. The context-based ads where, okay, somebody's reading a news article about weight loss and you put an ad for a local gym in there, it does as well or better in most cases than the surveillance-based ads. And making advertisers realize that they're getting screwed on the other end as well. And then just reconnecting local people to local businesses, that this is where you actually convert a click to a sale. It's not like, how often are you getting ads for shoes like 3 weeks after you finished buying your pair of shoes? You don't need your shoes anymore, but those context-based ads can really convert.
If there's one thing the ad sector has proven itself consistently very good at selling, it's ads to people who want to advertise things, not the products, but the ads, right?
Yeah.
And the whole story about surveillance advertising being an incredibly effective tool, the margin is about 5% more effective than context ad at the outside. And that's with this massive apparatus for spying on people that costs a lot more than 5%.
Right.
And so advertisers and publishers lose out on these surveillance ad systems. It's just the surveillance industry that makes money. John Wanamaker, who owned Wanamaker's department store, is famous for having said, "Half my ad dollars are wasted. I just don't know which half." The amazing thing about this is that his ad salesmen were so good, they convinced him that only half his ad dollars were being wasted, right? I mean, the number is more like 90%, as we know now that we have metrics. The thing that the press could do to really level the playing field here and get on the same side as their readers is to go all in on banning surveillance advertising, because there isn't a reader who likes surveillance advertising. And there used to be a debate about this. People used to say, oh, people like ads. They just don't like ads that aren't relevant, blah, blah, blah. And then Apple added a tick box to iOS that if you clicked it, would block Facebook tracking and therefore personalized ads. And 96% of iOS users clicked it. The other 4% either worked for Facebook or got confused, right? Nobody is like, yeah, give me more of those spying ads. And so if you really want to do a thing that your readers will love you for and will join you in, fight for banning surveillance ads. And then all that's left is context ads. And the thing is, no publisher will ever know as much about their readers as the surveillance industry, right? Publishers, even the ones that are doing their own ambitious tracking platforms, are not going to have a mobile operating system, contracts with 150 data brokers, SDKs that are used in the development of all the apps, like buttons or share buttons or sign in buttons on every web page in the world that are going to be gathering these dossiers on people. So when a publisher's intermediary, when their broker is a surveillance company, they will always be on the wrong side of that negotiation. They'll always have less negotiating power. But the one thing publishers will always know more about than surveillance companies is their own content. And so if we structure the publishing industry around content-based ads, context-based ads, then the publishers will always be at an advantage relative to these middlemen. And there's nothing wrong with middlemen. Our New York launch, we had Kate Judge as our interlocutor. Kate wrote this great book called Middlemen, about intermediaries. It's fine that intermediaries exist. I grew up in Toronto where there was this cult writer named Crad Kolodny who used to stand on a street corner selling his books with a sign that said, "Very famous Canadian author, buy my books." And loved Crad. He was very funny. I used to stop and talk to him. I found out later he secretly recorded conversations with people who stopped and talked to him when he started selling mixtapes of the weirdest conversations he had. He's a very entrepreneurial fella. He also used to just wear a sign that said Margaret Atwood, which was very funny. And when he died, they made a doc about him, and Atwood stood on his corner wearing a sign around her neck that said me, which is great. But not everyone has to be Crad Kolodny. It is fine that there are intermediaries out there that help different parts of the supply chain connect to each other, that help writers meet audiences and so on. The problem isn't the intermediary. The problem is when the intermediary usurps the relationship, when the intermediary becomes more important than the publisher and the reader or the driver and the passenger, or any of those other relationships that are so important in the way that we live our lives.
Oh, hey, that's a really nice iPhone you have there. You totally picked the right color. Hey, since you do use an iPhone and maybe use an iPad or an Apple Watch or an Apple TV, well, you should check out iOS Today. It's a show that I, Micah Sargent, and my co-host Rosemary Orchard host every Tuesday right here on the TWiT network. It covers all things iOS, tvOS, HomePodOS, watchOS, iPadOS. It's all the OSs that Apple has on offer, and we love to give you tips and tricks about making the most of those devices, checking out great apps and services, and answering your tech questions. I hope you check it out.